Coming to you from the Strings and Things studio in Ventura, California, welcome to the Strings Unraveled Book Club. Podcast thingy, whatever. Maybe by year 6 I'll get that intro.
No, right. It's fine. 6 years.
No, I'm thinking hopeful. Yeah.
Hi. What's up?
Well, this month was my pick, and we read The Murmur of Bees by Sofia Segovia. And this is the first. What attracted me to this book was that it was not written in English or even from a native English speaker.
Mm-hmm.
It actually had to be translated by someone not the author into English. So it was really interesting how the perspective came out. So here's a quick synopsis. It began on an October morning in 1910. Nana Reja, the wet nurse for 2 generations of the Morales family, lived on Hacienda La Amistad, now owned by Francisco Morales. The elderly woman found an infant with a cleft lip covered in bees, completely covered in bees, far from the plantation. Francisco Morales Jr. recounts his childhood on La Amistad in tandem with the events of that morning. Simona Pio generated fear because of his birth defect, especially in Francisco's most recent hire, Anselmo Espiricueto. A. It has an A on the end, unless this is a typo.
Okay. Nope, I never saw it written. Don't trust me.
Oh. Despite this, Simona Pio grew into a caring, intelligent, and observant child cared for by Nana Reja and his godparents, Francisco and Beatriz. He had the ability to understand his bees who rarely left his side. He could sense past, present, and future events. And with the knowledge that something deadly would strike Linares, that's the area where they lived, Simona Pio fell sick just to keep the Morales family away from Linares. And then it goes on from there. We can talk more about what happens. It is set against the backdrop of Mexican Revolution and the last pandemic of 100 years ago.
The 1918
Spanish flu, yep. Which was a misnomer. So. Yeah.
Literally the definition of that word.
Yeah, I tried to tell my mother-in-law that in reality it was brought to Europe by American soldiers, and that the only reason it was called the Spanish flu is because they were the first ones to own up that there was a problem, and her response was, "You're just repeating news to make Americans look bad."
Well, at least it's so like a lot of diseases are named after regions, right? Like Ebola is a region in Africa. Zika is I think a river in Africa. But at least this is like negging on a European region.
Yeah.
At least.
But it wasn't even the Spanish. Other countries had this problem, but they were the first ones to say, hey, I think there's something wrong with the world, and I think y'all are feeling it too, so let's just talk about it.
Yeah. Well, they weren't involved in the war, so they were,
Yeah, well, they were having their own.
Right.
Wait, no, I'm sorry.
Mexican Revolution. No?
Spain.
But this is not Spain.
Yeah. No, I
Oh, it was the...
We're talking about the Spanish.
But I'm also mixing things up, like Guernica was in later than this. Okay. So, never mind.
Oh, that's right. This is during a time when California was it still part of Mexico? No, I don't know. I should know this.
Okay, so it's set in 1910.
Yeah.
Mexico was relinquished California. I don't know, but I think it's the 1800s. But
that sounds
know.
Right. I should know because it's like
Mexico.
How long we've been a state.
Well,
pretty much.
I don't think that.
No. I take it back. One thing I do know is that California is the only state to already have a system of self-government before it became part of the United States. We had our own constitution.
Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848.
Oh, well, yeah.
So it's not. In some of these characters' lifetime, California would have been part of Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
California got its statehood. It's a very interesting time and setting. So California became a state September 9th, 1850, which I don't think I ever knew. I learned something new today.
I knew it was I felt like 1850 something was in my brain, but I didn't know. But now you know.
Okay, so neat.
Okay.
I
Anyway.
think I've always,
So that was fun.
You always relate things to your own point of view, right?
Right.
So
Mhm.
the book starts in 1910 and travels on through probably 1927, 1928, I think.
Well, there's also like the present day, not so much present day, but story of
the
Francisco
modern story.
Jr.
Yeah.
Is
But he's telling the story of
right.
1910
Right.
to the age he's 7, or maybe he was born in 1924.
Something like that.
So late 1920s, early 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that because the place I work was started in 1911. So it's always fun to think of like, wow, the
what
business I work in
time
was in Ventura at the same time this was happening.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was born in 1913, so that also gives me a little like, when you're trying to like
You're right,
give place and time to an experience.
Because my grandfather was born in 1911, and my grandmother had been born in 1914. So.
My grandfather would be 108 today.
Oh wow!
Except they wouldn't.
Right, I know.
I mean, how old would Elvis be? Like,
I don't care.
That's like people say. Like people say, how many hundreds of years old would George Washington be? It's like
he'd
nothing.
be the same amount of dead.
The same amount of dead.
But today is my grandfather's birthday.
Happy birthday, Grandpa!
Happy Bastille Day. Total non sequitur. Anyway. Except for no, it's not a non sequitur. Because Francisco Morales totally like he reminds me of my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Like
senior.
Or
senior.
Senior.
Yeah, senior.
Okay. Senior. No senior.
When the story starts, there's not a junior yet.
Right.
So
then that's a little bit confusing about the book.
Yeah.
And the opening first two exchanges of narrator.
Mm-hmm.
Francisco Jr., who at the point he's telling the story is now just
Francisco. The only Francisco.
When he says we find the baby, and then we go to Francisco's voice, and he's like, I was born on blah blah blah, and he starts talking about his mother, but yet there's this mysterious baby.
Yeah,
like it took
a while before it's like, okay, well, the narrator
it's
isn't
like about
born
half
yet
the
because
book.
they talk about the Francisco and Beatrice's
only the
daughters,
two babies, the two girls. That's right.
Simona Pio, and then I'm like, okay, but this other narrator is a child of theirs, and when does he come into play?
Yeah, there's
halfway through the book,
a little mystery too,
and there is the
unfolding.
There is some of the village mysticism coming into play a lot because it's a small little village, and this baby who is literally covered with bees, and those bees probably saved his life because he had a cleft palate. He was probably left out to die. And he didn't. And so some people, it takes a long time for some people to warm, and some people never do. He's always just a strange child.
Loved how much Francisco and Beatrice just loved him.
They loved him.
It was so
like it was their own child.
Unexpected.
And like straight from the beginning. They
because Nana Reja loved him, and they trust Nana Reja she raised. Okay, I hadn't gotten the idea that she was a wet nurse, which is not. She's not. I just thought she was this elderly person that took care of.
Well,
but then,
the whole verse.
Yeah, but then
that part's so confusing. I understand.
There's
how
a lot
you
of.
might not have
There was a lot of back and forth. The book goes back and forth in time periods a little bit, so it takes a little bit to adjust.
And
characters.
Voice.
And voice.
Sometimes there's a first person narrator and then there's a third person narrator. And once you get in the rhythm of it, it's clear.
And the first person voice changes. Each of the characters get their own.
It's
only Francisco
Jr.
Yeah.
And older.
Oh, see, in the audiobook there's different. It's confusing because in the audio
there's two narrators in the audiobook.
There's Francisco and
Beatrice.
There's like the narrator. She's not a character.
Oh, she's not a character.
But
we just get a lot of Beatrice.
We get a lot of Beatrice.
At the end of the book, they're sort of talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like
So
in
maybe
the
she's
chapter titles and stuff like that. They
yes,
sort of switch off and they're kind
so
of
maybe
talking to each
she's
other.
either Carmen or Consuelo.
She's nobody.
No,
she's
it's
nobody.
just a narrator.
She's
Okay.
nobody.
Yeah.
Okay, I
So-
wanted there to be magic connections in this too, because this genre is magical realism.
Mhm.
I have to say that I'm disappointed we never get where he comes from.
I have a theory.
I had one too, but
Okay.
once you gave me that chapter, it's wrong.
Oh, okay. So the mystery is, where did this child come from? Why
Yes.
is he covered in bees?
Yes.
Why does he have special abilities
Yes.
to know things before they happen, to see
Which
things,
that's
to be
not
connected to
that
things?
mysterious to me.
No,
Like,
I
I'm
can-
not that
Yeah.
confounded by that.
Yeah.
I'm willing to suspend disbelief.
But he has quote unquote powers that
Yeah.
other people in his community do not.
Yes, sensitivity, you
Right.
could call it. Maybe.
Awareness.
So
Awareness,
his
that's good.
The bees tell him.
his connection with the bees, I think the whole point is also to be connected with the land.
Yes.
Mhm.
So the bees lead him on this epic journey, and they try and they try and they try. He finally makes it to see where the orange trees are growing. He comes back and he tells his godfather, we need to grow orange trees. And then that helps cultivate the ground and like give rebirth to this land.
Mm-hmm.
So my theory is that the land created him, or that he was sort of a necessity for the land.
The
because
land needed
connection
him
is
to be
such
the
a big-
to be the voice of the land.
But he can't even talk, so what kind of voice is it?
Right. No,
But that
he can talk
he
if you're willing to listen.
True, because he can talk to Francisco Jr.
Yeah.
So before we go any further, I'm just gonna do a little introduction to the characters. Of course, we've been talking about Simona Pia, the baby who grows up as an adopted child of Beatrice and Francisco. Francisco Morales is the owner of La Amistad, which is a big grouping of land, many lands actually, kind of grouped together. He's a property owner. Beatrice Cortez de Morales. So I'm wondering if Cortez is like a family name, her side mixed.
It's her maiden name.
Her maiden name. She's the daughter of a privileged family in Linares whose father is murdered during the war. She is the one who, and then she marries Francisco. They have two daughters throughout the first half of the book. Two children, period, as daughters. There's Carmen, which is the eldest, and Consuelo, the younger. Later on in the book, Francisco Morales Jr. is born, and he's the only son, and as we've told, he's a storyteller in the novel. There's Nana Reja, and there's also another Nana.
Nana Pola.
Nana Pola, yeah.
Who I don't believe is related. I think she just is employed by the family.
She's a nanny. Nana is for nanny.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She nurses Guillermo Morales as a baby after his mother dies in childbirth, and she becomes a wet nurse Nana Reja, that is.
Uh-huh.
She becomes a wet nurse in Linares, an old woman. By the time where story comes along, she's an older woman, but she still cares for the children. Sometimes when they're scared or they're little, they sleep in her bed, and she just because they went
Simona Pio.
Oh, only Simona Pio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then there's
she's glued to her rocking chair. Like
pretty
the
much.
rocking chair is an extension of her.
And even
body.
when she's not in the rocking chair rocks.
Yeah, that's weird.
There's like a word.
But I love it.
Then here's the protagonist. Is it the right word? The protagonist, the villain?
No, antagonist.
The antagonist is Anselmo Espiricueta. He's a migrant heading north with his family, and he reluctantly becomes a laborer on La Amistad. And we're going to have a lot to say about him.
What's the word peon? How is it spelled?
Peon.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then there's Lupita, the washerwoman for the Morales family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I got the sense that Lupita was a distant cousin that came to work for them at one point. She's kind of related, but she's one of the lesser.
I think it was there was something where her mother needed to like find a safe place for her, so she came and they sort of just took her in.
And she still
was
kind
under their protection.
She's under the protection.
That's part of what breaks Beatrice.
Right. Oh yeah, because she's kind of, but she is to them as if she were family.
Yeah.
There is not an equal status. But
Francisco and Beatrice are very benevolent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, so I did the thing that you do, Katie.
What did I do?
Reviews? I noticed that you do a lot of reading of reviews to kind of process your thoughts on the books. So I really, really enjoyed this book.
I think we should start there. Is
Yeah.
how we feel about it before we get too far in.
I really enjoyed this book. I did not love when the narrator said, and Beatrice didn't say goodbye, because I knew what we'd been building to was coming.
Yeah.
And I
always
had to stop.
take the time to say goodbye to family.
Well, I took a couple days off because I was getting close, because I think there's only 4 hours left in the book. So I was driving on our last road trip, and I just I cried the entire time. Kevin was napping, and I just cried the whole time it was happening, because it gets very descriptive of his death and of her grief. It's
so tangible,
which leads me to the other thing is sometimes it just went on and on and on and on.
That's my problem with this book, is that I felt like it dragged forever, but it was beautiful, and I enjoyed it at the same time. But oh my god, hurry up, because at some point you know what's going to happen, but let's just freaking get there already.
I think it took him an hour to die.
But I also know that this was not meant for was not written for an English audience.
I don't think
that makes a difference.
I think it does. I think
don't.
Just
But
like people that take a siesta, there are many cultures that have a slower pace of how they do things.
I've read American written stories that are also extremely slow.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think
I'm not saying that I didn't enjoy it because I did. I think that's an interesting
point of view about why you think it has this pace. I think it might just be the style of this author.
Mm-hmm.
Because I brought up that Grapes of Wrath had the same kind of...
There's a lot more pages, I think.
Grapes of Wrath just was slowly paced.
Yes.
But, Thomas Hardy as a novelist, I don't enjoy. Because he tells beautiful stories.
But way too many details.
But he tells the
minutia
color of every petal and leaf in the meadow as Tessa D'Oberville walks through.
Oh, that would be the one.
Stop it.
That's when you mentioned...
She walked to town.
When you mentioned Grapes of Wrath, it's do we need a whole chapter about a damn turtle? No.
There's deep symbolism in that turtle too.
I will say.
Sure. But then it's the same thing with this. It's do we need 100 chapters in this book? I don't think so. I think they were beautifully written.
Yeah,
and some of those chapters were only a paragraph or a sentence long.
There's 100 of them.
Yes.
Well, but they're not all equal. And I thought about maybe there was just something they wanted to break it so they could say there's 100 chapters.
I will say the author definitely took their time.
Yes.
In telling the story.
Yes.
Which I think is also sort of symbolic of the fact that Francisco Jr., who is now an old man, is telling you the story. And if you've ever been told an epic story by an old man, it can also last 12 hours. So
right?
I get that.
It's true. How many times does the grandpa just go, yeah, grandpa, we heard this.
Yep.
And it took just as long
that's
time.
part of his point. I love he says this. Okay, but we're still giving our impression.
Yeah.
Hold on. Okay.
So I read a review because there was something bothering me about this book, is that there's definitely a black and white of who's good in the story and who's bad, and there's no nuance to who the bad person, that his feelings are valid. I mean, he is very bad.
Yes.
But the feelings of the lower class and the being a laborer versus the benevolent landowner, those, their antagonism is not...
And they do mention, apart from Anselmo, that there's this workers' revolution forming.
Yeah.
But it's never in a or in a sensitive way. It's because it's told by Francisco Jr.'s point of view, and he thinks that they're the bad guys. That's a scary thing that's coming.
Well, also, when the narrator's speaking in each person's inner monologue, you just hear about it being bad. I'm almost there. So this book is a very anti-socialism book. Very clearly pro-capitalism, and not even necessarily capitalism, pro-elite, bad socialists.
Yeah.
So the review I read was a 1-star review of this book is racist. Or actually, I think the person gave 2 reviews. One was, is this book racist? Maybe. And then they gave a second 1-star review that's this book is absolutely maybe racist.
Absolutely maybe.
And then they gave paragraph analysis on what the gist of what I'm saying is
I feel
Espiricueto is a bad man.
Yeah.
okay.
But
I feel like
his, you know,
parts of this book are written in the same way as Gone with the Wind, with the mentality
Yes.
that
but this
there's
book was
bad
written in 2015.
that there are some bad plantation owners that own, but we're
Yes.
not them. The idea that we provide education and work for our people, and we only ask a little bit of what it's like. The way they position themselves as being the good plantation owners, I could hear it. And you only got a little bit sense of the other. I mean, not talking about the main antagonist, but the other characters that worked for them. I don't always get the sense that they felt that life was as happy as Francisco and Beatrice clearly had in their head.
We actually
They saw themselves as very good people.
and they are.
And they are.
because they're
They
not
do a lot.
plantation owners.
No.
They're employers. I want
They're
to be clear
employers.
about
They
that,
do
'cause
pay.
That's where the
They do
connection
pay.
of I come from an agricultural family, like, you know,
Yeah.
they're employers.
They're employers. They do, besides a pay,
and they transformed their economy, their local economy.
Yeah.
Too.
Mhm.
They are
Yeah.
not the bad guys, but they are also not saints.
no.
Sure.
And they are certainly different than Espiricueto's. Probably like. I mean, it sounded like he was an indentured servant in southern Mexico.
Mhm.
And when he escaped,
But he was truly an employee.
but
of
he
the
was
Moraleses.
so bitter about.
Yeah.
Also, he was lazy. He did not work. He expected everything to just come to him. He had this dream, and I got the sense that
I don't think he was lazy. He did work hard. He just did it poorly. Like, tell me an example of his
Okay.
laziness.
I felt like there are times where he should have worked the land harder. He didn't water when he was supposed to. He didn't care for things because in his mind, he wasn't really going to take care of it until it was his. Why should why should he care and work for
I don't
somebody
think
else's
that's
property?
True. He did when Francisco comes up to see him and invites him to finally transform his plot into an orchard. He's noticing, like, you know, they water when we all water. Like, he's noticing that they do work the land, but he puts the same efforts and same actions into the land, but never yields anything from it.
But
It's like he's poisoning the land.
with his
Yeah, I think he is under the false impression the whole time that it's his land
Yes.
when it's technically not,
And
and he doesn't have a right to it,
Yep.
even though he believes that he does.
and yet doesn't he? have
Well, that's
it?
the thing.
I
is,
don't
like,
know. He
that's the
has a chip on
capitalist
his
in me
shoulder.
is like,
Right.
it's not yours.
Right.
You don't own it.
Right.
You didn't take the risk. You didn't
Well,
pay
that's
for
the
it.
thing,
But
Neither did
but
Francisco Sr. because he inherited it.
yeah.
Well, but here's the thing, like I think there is a quality to the other people who work the land with Francisco and for
Mhm.
Francisco, is that they might be happy and content. I am happy and content to be an employee in part of my
Sure.
life. And I appreciate and have appreciated for this employer and the last employer that they bear that weight on their shoulders. And I like it. So, I mean, I think a lot of people are happy to live that way.
And I couldn't help but feel like at the end of the novel, when the family moves away and the servants, or not servants because they are, the employees who live there are then given the chance to buy their plot of land.
Yeah. It just makes me sick.
Yeah.
So let's break this down into some topics.
Hold on, I have one more thing.
Okay.
You got to share your theory of where.
Yeah. What's
Do you
your
have a theory of where
I
he
don't.
came from? Okay.
I don't.
He was a necessity of the land. That's my theory.
I think that's interesting.
Okay.
And it's a lot more valid than mine. I got thinking when Lupita's was thrown under the bridge that that Simone Pio was found under, that maybe Simone Pio was Espiricueto's child. Because the wife, they arrived and the wife was very pregnant. But when I went to listen to chapter 18, it was the daughter. That poor little girl.
Yeah. Margarita or whatever her name was.
But when that was living in my head, that idea, it was like, it was so perfect that Espiricueto abandoned this baby and the bees came to save the baby, and he thinks it's the devil, because that's what people have thought in the past about people who were born
The cleft.
with cleft palate or other malformations or whatever, that it was a curse and the devil
Right.
and they're a demon, that all along Simone Pio was his own son. Like, is
that would have been
beautiful?
fun to think
That's
about.
good.
That
Yeah.
would have
It's
been
not
so
true.
ironic.
Not true.
Okay,
So you have some questions for us?
yeah, more this particular thing talks about, has different topics or themes that are pulled out as topics of discussion. One of the first ones they talk about is the storytelling itself.
Mm-hmm.
The novel very explicitly shares a perspective on storytelling in pages compared to owning your own story. Here's a quote from the book. Simone Pio knew that there were stories that one could read in books with black words on white pages. He was not interested in those because, once printed, they were indelible, unchanging. Each reader had to follow the order of words indicated in those pages exactly until they arrived inexorably at the same outcome. But then later on he also says, being in possession of that story meant Simone Pio could being in possession of his own story meant that he could make endless changes, could add or remove characters as he saw fit and give them the traits of the people around him. So how does that writing style reflect storytelling? How did you find what did you think about the non-linear pathways? Were they intriguing, confusing, poetic? What other novels have you read with non-linear? Does it remind you of other books with similar writing style? And how do the arcs of those novels unfold? That kind of thing.
I'm often frustrated in listening or reading books with like non-linear like pathways through the story, like this one had, or ones where it switches perspective between narrators or just perspectives in general. But I didn't find that to be a problem with this book, even though it was longer than I wish it was. It was relatively clear how we were going to get to where we were going,
Yes.
and it was also relatively clear, like you knew what the story was going to be
once
from
it
the
came
beginning.
Clear.
Yes.
Like at the beginning, I will say I was confused.
Yeah,
but once
it didn't
came
take
clear,
long to figure out.
Yeah.
And I don't think, sometimes I feel like I'm left in the dark where I'm like, I don't think I understand what the author wants me to understand. Like I feel like I'm the one that's behind, and everybody else that might be reading it's like, oh no, I understood that. Whereas at this one I was like, I think I understood at the exact point when the author wanted me to.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that the author was a good writer in that sense, that it wasn't, I didn't feel like I was in the dark.
Fair enough.
And I feel like some of that might have also been contributed to the interpreter, the person who translated it, because I had read some comments about it was how, yes, the author had the line of writing that she did, but in order to translate that into a fluid English version, that there was a lot of credit given to the translator. I'm with you. I like to have my hand. I don't necessarily have to have my hand held, but I like a straight line, or at least a mildly curvy line. It's hard when something jumps in and out of a timeline. Except in this case, I felt like each time they took you out of a timeline, it planted a seed of connect, and it wasn't so hard to connect.
You knew you were going to come back, and you knew exactly where it was. Or if it didn't pick up right then, you understood what had happened in the meantime.
Enough to...
It wasn't hard to keep track of where the story was going, I think.
I found it... all those... what were the three descriptors? All three of them.
Intriguing, confusing, poetic.
All
I think it helped that
in the order: confusing, intriguing, poetic.
Yeah. I think it helped that the audiobook had two separate narrators.
Voices.
That made it easier.
Yeah. Oh, if they were all one voice, that would have been... And in the audiobook, I love the accents. It's like I really felt like I was listening to the story. It wasn't just it was not just English, but English with a Spanish accent.
The female narrator was really good.
Yeah.
Like,
I really thought I was thought I was
job.
hearing the female characters. I forgot.
But I also, when she was speaking in the male characters,
Mm-hmm.
which is not, like, I think I've said this before, it's not always well done. but
Right.
she did for any gender.
She didn't
to
really
switch.
do voices,
But she,
which
but
I
her
think
tone
I
changed.
appreciated.
Yeah, like she
It was very subtle.
She did good service to when she was in
Yes.
each person's voice.
Yeah.
Okay, on the topic of love of family and love of land, Sofia Segovia shares that the novel explores both the love of family and the love of land, from Nana Reja losing her child and becoming a wet nurse to the brotherhood between Simona Pio, this one's typed as Simona Pio with an O, and Francisco Jr. The family bonds are tight and loving. What moments or descriptions best encompass love in your reading of the novel? Which were there moments where this was connected that what are some of your favorite?
Well, I just love Simona Pio's devotion to Francisco Jr. Like, I just love it.
Yeah. And his devotion to his adopted family as well as his adopted family's devotion to him equally. Like they treated him like it was their son.
Yeah.
Even when they had their own son that came along, a biological son that they didn't expect, it didn't change anything.
No.
I had this worried tension when Francisco was lost and the men found him. I was worried because Simona Pio could not speak easily for himself that they wouldn't understand what had happened.
That they were going to blame him or something.
But thankfully, like,
I think
they just know that wouldn't have
because
been
by
him.
that point they knew him. The people who were looking for, they knew his character enough, not to know that no one would ever think he was a violent person.
I was worried when
also
listening.
The bad guy's horse was nearby. That was the other thing. I'm like, oh, okay.
I was worried while reading this that it was gonna fall under that like trope of like. Not that Simona Pio was not mentally challenged, but some people thought that he was just because he didn't speak.
Yeah.
But sometimes those characters in older like media become like the villain, or not the villain, but people are afraid of them.
Yeah.
And it seemed like the only person that was really afraid of him
was the villain.
And maybe everybody else who were just decent regular people came to learn. Maybe they were at first.
Yeah.
But they were like, no, he's fine. Like, I'm not worried about him. You know.
That might be what's so refreshing about everyone's pure love for him and the pure love he gave out is like that doesn't happen except with the most misguided character.
Right. I was worried it was going to, but that wasn't.
And that might have been where I'm like, oh my god, like, are they gonna?
No.
I mean, Beatrice would never let that happen. She knew.
Yeah.
So, I also thought of the perspective of Simona Pio and the bees. In a way, the bees were another family for him. They communicated. They were there. They protected him when he was a baby, and even though bees do not live as long as we do, the generation after generation of part of this hive have connected and bonded with him to the point that when he would never ask them to. He would, except in times of trying to help his family. He knew that by asking the bees to come and help rescue the son, he knew it was too late to rescue the father, that they were willing to lay down their life. They knew that so much of their love for him even overcame the love for the land, because I saw that their numbers were depleted. How that connection between here's that love of how the animals and we're all sort of connected. They showed him the old orange grove. They kept calling it an orchard, but it's a grove. But at least maybe in my English it's a grove. In another language it might not be.
Orchard?
It can be an orchard because I thought orchards were like apples or something like that. They can be an orchard.
Because we have orange orchards in Fillmore.
We have orange groves.
They're still orchards.
I thought citrus was groves.
I think you can still call it an orchard.
Maybe all.
Maybe it's a regional term.
All fruit
groves are orchards, but not all orchards are groves.
That's true.
Like, is this sentence gonna work?
So that connection between they helped bring the bees helped bring the land back, but because of the bees' sacrifice, there weren't enough bees to pollinate the orange trees
for a year. Yeah.
And was it a year or for a few years?
Well, I remember
for a
them
time.
Talking. Yeah.
For a time.
Ding ding, a time.
But how to sacrifice their sacrifice to save the boy affected it had a ripple effect going
Right
down.
on, yeah.
But it was a necessary thing.
Yep. It was necessary. I mean, I loved imagining what it looked like to have Simonopio charging at them full speed.
With a roar.
With the roar of the bees behind him.
Oh my gosh, the swarm.
Made me cry more.
The difference between an orchard and a grove is an orchard is an area of land devoted to the cultivation of fruit. A grove is a small wood or stand of trees lacking any dense undergrowth.
Oh.
So I think a grove is just smaller.
Okay.
And an orchard is specifically
fruit.
planted,
specifically fruit.
Cultivated.
So he found an ancient grove, and they made orchards.
There you go.
Sure.
Yep.
But I also think at the point when the bees were sacrificing themselves to save Francisco Jr., that they had already done what they needed to do, according to my theory, which was to cultivate the land, and bring it back to life and, fruitfulness, literally fruitfulness.
And then they kind of talk about that a little bit. Because at first they would not go into the bee boxes, but you're right. Once their job was done and they were ready to move on, they moved into the bee boxes so that they could be moved.
Yeah, so someone up here could move them.
Mm-hmm.
Which just happened to be just enough for what they needed.
They made do. They made themselves fit.
So Simona Pio seems to know stuff ahead of time. How do you think he did not know at the concert?
I was
It's the
thinking about
only
that. You're
only
right,
time he
because
wasn't.
He sensed when danger was arising with the flu.
Mm-hmm.
There was another time when he was like, "Don't go that way" or something.
Yeah, something with Beatrice. I thought he got her.
I don't remember.
I think
he was,
but so distracted.
I think he let himself be distracted because he was excited to go see the concert. Like
it was the
everybody
one
else
time.
was.
It was the one time he let himself desire something for himself.
Yeah.
And so then he couldn't sense what was going on, to the point that he even lost his shoes. And okay, so do we get to answer on that topic of love of land and love of family? Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next topic is memory. Let's explore how the memories change over time. In the novel, Francisco Morales Jr. muses that memories are a curious thing. While I always felt fortunate to have a few photographs of my father, they ended up contaminating my memories of him. Because I looked at them so much, they gradually replaced the flesh and blood man whose body had a smell, whose voice had a timbre, whose hair would ruffle, and whose smile, when he unleashed it, was more contagious than the flu. So do you find this true? How have your memories been altered with the passage of time? How do you remember a photographed experience? And when and how do you remember a moment for which you have never seen a photo? Are the qualities of the memory different?
Yeah, I think it's scientifically proven that you can manipulate and form false memories based on photographs. I was talking with somebody the other day about how people will ask, like, what's your what the first memory of your life is, and I'm always like, how the hell am I supposed to know what the first my first memory is? Yeah. But I think I figured out in thinking, like, what's something I can remember from being a little kid where there would have been no reason for there to be a camera there at all. Yeah. And I specifically remember being at my babysitter's house when I lived in Oxnard, which I moved when I was 4 or 5, and it was before that. So I was 3 or 4, and I remember being at her house watching Woody Woodpecker on her television. And there would have been no reason for anybody to have taken a picture of me watching Woody Woodpecker on her television. So, but I can remember, or not really, but I can pull up memories of other events because my mom took a lot of pictures and made a lot of scrapbooks. So we have a lot of pictures. So in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that, but I remember the picture, you know?
Yeah. No, my first memory is of the day my little brother was born, which I was just short of 4. I was 3.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was actually just barely 3. I was 3 1/4 years old. My birthday's in August. He's December. But I remember the day that he was born. I remember, like, because my mom went in labor really early in the morning. So I remember my dad waking me up and me yelling up the stairs to wake my siblings up. And I remember being taken over to the hospital and having to wait outside.
Yeah.
And
it's not only photographs, but also
there's
just telling
there's no
the story.
photos of me that day.
But it can also just be in retelling the story from like if your dad told you that story.
No, this is my, like, I have a memory that it's not part of their story.
Right.
Of the day he was born.
But if your dad was like, "Oh yeah, I woke you up in the morning," and he told you that story so many times, you'd be like, "Yeah, I remember that," even if you didn't. But
this is not one of those.
But that's
stories,
just a pure memory.
So, a funny thing. So you were saying, like, you can create false memories based on seeing pictures. But another thing is that memories, like another study, is that memories change the more you access them. Right. But a photo, like, that's unchanging.
That's why it's such a clear memory, because you're like, no, I remember specifically. I was wearing the Mickey Mouse t-shirt or whatever, you know? But you don't remember that.
No.
You remember a picture.
Right.
And then you may be able to recall the day or, like, you know.
Yep.
I will say, there are things that I had more early memories up until about a decade ago. And that's what, I guess, when I started getting the headaches, chronic headaches, because I used to have very clear memories of being 3 years old, and not a lot of them, but very distinct memories that stayed intact. But as I've gotten older and those things were not as important to hold on to, they become kind of fuzzy. You know, like, have you ever had an old picture that degraded over time and the details are gone? That's kind of like what the memory is like. I know they did talk about here about people say that a scent in particular can trigger memories. I know that there were years, like, when we lived in Valencia, there was like a little store that was all like handmade goods and soaps and stuff.
Cobblestone Cottage.
Maybe that was something from since it was right near where off of Newhall. No, not Newhall Road. What is the road? There used to be a Hughes Market, whatever that was.
It's Cobblestone Cottage.
But it was called something different, something from the pasture. But anyway,
maybe
many years.
There's like one corner in that shopping center that used to be like, that was like something every year, and Cobblestone Cottage is still there. Like,
this was
it's been there for
okay.
a long
So this
time.
was not in the corner.
Oh, I
That's
know where
why.
that is.
Yeah. Cobblestone Cottage is along the long between.
See, a decade ago, I could have told you exactly the name. They had a lot of Americana.
It's Cobblestone Cottage.
It was Cobblestone Cottage. They changed the name. It wasn't that.
Wait,
before.
hold on. No, you know what? I'm sorry. Forgive me. Gifts from the Attic.
There it is.
Yeah.
I knew it was something from the something.
They're in 2 different places.
So Gifts from the Attic. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Oh, because she lived there.
Anyway, it's Granary Square.
Granary
I could
Square.
walk there in 15 minutes.
But anyway, I'd forgotten all about that place, and then I was someplace where I walked by a candle that was blown.
A Yankee candle, maybe.
I know, but or some kind of potpourri, because they had
so much potpourri.
So much potpourri. But that's when I started thinking about that, and it was talking about, like, someone can here's a quote: "Someone can tear open an orange nearby, and the aroma transports me to my mama's kitchen or my papa's orchard."
I love that part. Because you want to go there too. Like,
I have it pulled up here. It's like the 2nd chapter of the book.
Yeah,
when he's talking about
page 16.
His home where he was born. The scent of my mother's pecan sweets, of her preserves and jams, of the thyme that grew in pots in the kitchen, and more recently of the oranges, blossoms, and honey, as they always floated in the air. And I remember farther along in the book thinking, when are the oranges going to come into play? Because then when he finally, like, gives him the gift of the orange blossoms, I was like, oh yeah, I remember thinking, why does he smell oranges when they don't grow oranges, but they do later on. But I remember reading that earlier on in the book.
Isn't that funny?
As part
That's
of his memory.
So integral to Francisco Jr.'s sense and memory. And then when Francisco Sr. is going to transform the land into orchards, Beatrice is mourning the senses
Right.
that are going away
that are
from
leaving.
that change, like the sight of all the fields, the sugar cane, and the smells and sounds that
And the
come with that
sounds, yeah.
activity.
I think I just clung on to it because living in Fillmore, I
That's
know exactly
a
when that
sense-
smell
yeah,
comes around, and I
exactly.
know, yeah.
Oh, it's so
It
lovely.
doesn't
on a
come to
summer,
my
like,
side of town.
summer
You just gotta
night.
drive to the other side.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
'cause
drive to the other side
Sometimes
because
it's a not nice smell depending on which way the wind's
True.
blowing, and then some nights it's like
Yeah.
intoxicating and beautiful.
to me sounds are that way. Like I love the sound of crickets, and certain times of year, like now, I love when we can turn the air conditioning off early and open up the windows, and then there's this chorus of frogs, and there's not even any water really in the river, so I don't know where these frogs are. They're in everybody's backyards.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because
They're in my backyard. I've seen them.
Yep.
But okay, so let's talk about secrets.
Secrets.
In the end, Beatrice chooses not to ask Simone Pio what happened on the day that her husband died, and her son speculates on myriad reasons why she didn't. Among them, here's a quote: "And there were things that it was better not to know. We would leave it in order to forget the bad things, the absences and the abandonments. We would go to remember just the good things, and in our ignorance we would heal."
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's something in
I'm a little
grief.
conflicted about that.
Well, there's something in grief that they say, like, when you lose someone, you should talk about it as much as
Right.
possible and say it to whomever will listen, because it makes it real.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they don't talk about what really happens, it protects them somewhat.
It's a very human action to shut down to that, though, because sometimes it's hard to. So I can understand why Beatrice didn't want to even think about it or talk about it, because that's natural.
Like,
it's
once
not good
you know
for
it,
you.
you can never unknow it.
Yeah, and it's not good for you, but also, I mean, it's like this or that. You either go about your life pretending or just not knowing because it helps you move on, but you're not really moving on necessarily, or you find out what the true answer is, and then you have to live with that, you know?
Yeah. How are you going to survive?
Which it sounds
Right.
to me like Francisco Jr., when he became just Francisco, he spent most of his life not really remembering what happened, because for the longest time no one talked about it, or it was overwhelming, so he just said, I don't know, I honestly don't remember, and people kept questioning him. And then I think as an adult, I mean, it's like, wow, he got to be an old man before he was ready to just talk, connect again with his brother. Can you imagine being that close? I guess, and then I know some of it is the deep hurt and break of not saying goodbye, of feeling like you were abandoned by this person that you thought loved you as much. But then all of that is still coming from the perspective of a very young, what was he, 4 years old?
No, he
Or
was
seven?
7.
He's 7, but he's still a young child.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
7 is a baby
7 is
still.
tiny.
Yeah. But you have a lot of memories of that time. Like, that's a time when you're really coming into your, like, self-realization and your understanding of your place in the world.
But being the only son, I think maybe, I mean, his mama kind of spoiled him a little bit.
Well, that's where there's a cultural thing. Like, it's sort of funny that every time he talks about how his mother talked about him, he was like, you're full of fleas.
Yeah.
You can't keep clean.
He's the runt. He's the... Yeah.
But that's not usually how Mexican mothers talk about their sons. Like, one of my coworkers jokes. He's like, well, I'm the boy, so I'm a prince, right? So we can see both sides of,
like, that's his memory, is that his mom didn't like him that much because he was dirty and gross.
Yeah.
But you saw from the mother's perspective that was not the case.
Yeah. At the point where, like, I enjoyed that this book reflected some of what we've lived through in the isolation of the pandemic.
I have some passages highlighted I would like to read.
Yeah.
Yes.
That sort of
Hit
I don't
home?
mean to interrupt you,
No,
but
please.
yes, that did hit home. Okay.
I don't have any passages.
From
Carry
chapter
on.
11. At the time, the doors to the cathedral were kept locked because the federal government had ordered all gathering places to remain closed. Theaters,
Oh, yeah.
movie houses, bars, and of course churches. From chapter 13. He had tried to convey to the inhabitants of the town how important it was to remain in quarantine, to not leave the house if anyone was sick, and needless to say, to also stay home if anyone was lucky enough to have no infection in the family. And then later on, the miracle would have been if those arrogant fools with the fate of the country in their hands had listened in time to the voices of the experts.
That.
But now it was too late.
Yeah,
I was
that
like, oh
left
my God.
That one left
That
my
was
ears ringing.
6 months ago.
Right?
So relevant.
Yeah,
So,
that was incredible.
This book was published in 2015.
Yes. I know. I was like, did she write this last year?
I know, because there have been some great books that authors are putting out.
I just thought that was so. I was reading it and I was like, whoa.
Yep.
If she could only have. Well, no. Was that when it was written or when it was translated?
It was written in
know.
2015. I looked it up this afternoon. Yeah.
I wonder when it was translated. I didn't look that up.
Well, it was an audiobook in 2019. So I still thought, wow, how prescient. Even if it came out in 2019, I mean, she was still ahead of the game. But
Translation copyright 2019.
Still before the shutdown.
Right.
Sure. I just thought that was so funny.
Yeah.
I remember saying, oh my gosh.
Yep.
Okay. So I really identified with Simone Peel on one thing.
Okay.
I mean, I loved him and I would love to be more like him, more intuitive, listen to the surroundings, you know. But his fear of clowns.
Oh, yeah.
So
that's normal.
Yep. Yep.
I feel like I would have had the same reaction having been taken to a circus at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my, that's like a 5-year-old memory is going to the circus.
I've never been and I don't think I would ever like to.
Don't do it.
No.
Don't do it. We actually drove by a Ringling Brothers while I was listening to this book. That was far after the clown part.
There's a reason why Circus Vargas got shut down.
It's still around. That's what we drove by.
Are you really?
Yeah, we drove by a Circus
I wonder if
Vargas.
because there's so many times, like, when my husband worked at the radio station, they always had free tickets. And when the kids were little, we thought, oh, that might be fun.
It's almost like they pay you to go there.
Yeah.
But it is, but okay, I feel what he felt in that it seems like it's exciting, but you do, like, when he describes, can you find the part where he talks about the tiger? The lifeless dead eye, the lion, the lifeless dead eyes of the lion who's just doing what he's told, and all the soul that should be in that magnificent beast was basically crushed. And and no one could, like, he's so in tune with the animals that he could sense that, like, oh, wow, no, how can no one see what's right in front of his eyes?
Through that.
So it says, next up was the lion with its tamer carrying a whip and a torch that he used to make the beast jump through hoops of fire. The tamer managed to get the lion to leap from bench to bench and roar now and then, but it was all a pretense, because in the cat's eyes there wasn't the faintest trace of fierceness. He lived, he moved, he roared a little, and awkwardly he did whatever the tamer requested with his whip, but he was dead inside. That was when Simone Peel's eyes welled up.
Oh.
And that's kind of how we felt when we went to see Circus Vargas.
Yeah,
no, I have no desire.
Yep. I don't think they do animals at circuses anymore. I think
not in the same way.
But when we only had one child and he was like a toddler, we did take him. Or we might have a second. We might have Trevor might have been around by that point. But yeah, and we're like, they're not enjoying this, and this is just really sad to watch.
Yeah.
And there was, plus at the time there were a lot of people outside the circus protesting. And I'm like, okay, I feel like, okay, I'm in my car. I'm driving past. I'm breaking a picket line to go to this. This feels wrong, and I felt like it. It was horrible.
Well, I think we should wrap up. So, do we want to do like final thoughts, or do you have one more topic we can touch on, or?
Hold on. Well, we talked about the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about life's gifts. I mean, some of the topics are death. I don't want to talk about death.
Well, we already did a little bit.
We did a little bit.
This
Growing
book will
old.
make you cry.
Yeah.
Yes. There were times where I'm like, and my heart just like, yeah. And when the storm that you knew was going to come finally broke.
It definitely turned out differently than I thought. I really thought the confrontation would be between Simone Peel and Espira Cueto. So it was a surprise to me that it was Francisco
I was kind
Sr.
of glad that it wasn't.
Right.
Because I don't think... Simone Peel knew that he would have to face this man at some point, but he didn't kill him.
No.
But he thought he was the lion.
But the bees are part of him, so I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
But I think it still took him by surprise. That he didn't... Not everything was clear because he thought he was the lion.
Mm-hmm.
And it was no mystery who the coyote was, but he was. But really, Francisco was the lion.
Oh, poor.
I know.
Poor Francisco Jr. He tried to tell his dad.
Yeah.
I always felt pretty awful for Espiricueto's children, for that poor girl who had,
Yeah.
and I felt bad for this. I didn't know how to feel. I felt bad that his son died with him, because I don't think the son was bad, but the son had learned you don't cross dad,
Yeah.
and but his thinking was already kind of like his dad, but not fully formed.
And you don't know.
The son was completely cardboard. We never got to know
Yeah,
any
but
of his
he would
dialogue.
have grown up learning a lot of lessons from his father, and could have carried in similar
Yeah, it could have gone either way.
footsteps. So
Could have gone either way.
that was sad, and I felt bad for his daughter.
Yep.
But he was a bad man. He did really bad things.
Well, he ruined Beatrice had so much goodwill for that child.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he ruined it for her.
Yeah.
Well, because as much as I mean, I thought, well, is she going to be benevolent because it's not the child's fault? She can't, because every time she would look at that child, it would.
She's
She
not
was.
a child anymore. She's the same age as Simona Pio at the end of the book.
Yeah, I think
Oh.
she's like
she's
adult,
a young woman.
So when
Yeah.
that happens, she was also a young teen.
Simona Pio is like 19,
he was
20
19.
at
at
the
the
Oh,
end.
that's right, 19 or
I
20.
think she was like but still, she
and
was.
and unmarried, and with no education, because her father would let her have a free education.
But I mean, now that her father's gone, she can. They said that she can go, to the convent, or she can stay, and like she was merciful enough to not just burn
Knock
her
the
house
house
down
down. Yeah.
while she was
With
in
the
it.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Here, we'll give you a chance to get your things, but then this is never going to be anything for anybody
Yeah.
ever again. So
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I do wish that I think by the time that we finally got to the culmination of what we knew was going to happen, I was so over it that I was like, okay, it was sad and it was hard to listen to, but I didn't cry, because I was kind of at that point like,
No,
okay,
I cried.
I knew what was happening.
I
knew what was coming.
I was
Okay.
gut wrenched, but only because I felt that the last third was the speed it should have been the rest of the first 2/3. I thought the last third went faster.
Well, see, that
I
part
don't
is
think
what
so. I
dragged
think that's
for
what
me.
took forever.
Yeah. Like an hour to die, Karen.
Well, yeah, but see,
Yeah.
when you're but is it really an hour when you're listening at 1.5 speed?
Oh, fair enough.
I was listening at 2 times speed at that point, so
I listened at normal speed. It took a
I-
long time.
I listened at 1.5 speed for the majority of it until it was like yesterday, and I had 4 hours left to listen to. So I can listen at 2 times speed and read at the same time, like have the words in front of me and get through it pretty quickly.
Right.
That's true.
But then at the very end, for the last chapter, I turned it back to normal speed so I could just like finish it off.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh my god, this man talks slow.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. So Francisco Jr.'s
I
old
did-
man monologue
I
was
want
a
to say
little.
one more thing about that.
Yes.
Like, how dare you put this on a stranger?
But the stranger was into it.
Right?
But
Yeah.
yes, he wasn't consensual in this.
I am
need you
an
to
Uber
drive me
driver.
here.
I'm an Uber driver, and I just dropped your dad off in Linares.
And he just walked
And he's just
away.
gonna walk away and die in the
And,
woods. But he told
yeah.
me to tell you it's gonna be
yeah,
okay.
don't look for him.
Yeah.
He'll be fine.
Yeah,
That
right.
is true. Yeah, that's
Uber
not very
driver
nice to do.
convicted of elder murder.
Yeah, elder abuse or
Yeah.
yeah, that is true.
And like, if your dad decided to just go wander off into the woods to die, are you gonna let that stand, or are you gonna go get like, I need the Ventura sheriff to
Yeah.
help me go do like a well check.
Yeah, exactly.
That was like really, I had a hard time stomaching.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, we're done. now.
Anyway.
Great book though. I did enjoy it.
I enjoyed it too. I think it's one of those books that I'm going to remember, that'll stick with me. I
Yeah.
think just
Mhm.
because I was with it for so long.
Yeah.
But I did enjoy it, and I would recommend it if you have some time.
And if you want to do the audiobook and enjoy it at a little quicker pace, 1.5 plus speed is good.
It was lovely. I got an early start on this one, thankfully, and I was able to listen to it at normal speed.
Yeah.
When I was re-listening, I did it 2 times speed.
I intended to listen to it at like a leisurely pace, and then I had the like digital version because I thought, oh, I'm going on a trip, I'll read. I didn't read at all except for
You
about
never
half
do
an
on a
hour on
trip.
an airplane. But I thought I would. I didn't have any time. But
Okay. What are you
Okay,
guys
all right.
reading? Any reading recommendations?
I have
pull
not read
mine up.
anything else.
Well, I have a If You Liked This, The Magical Realism.
Okay.
Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia.
Okay.
Really cool. This young girl gets wrapped up in like this battle of ancient Aztec gods.
Oh,
it's fantastic.
That sounds interesting.
It's really good. It's set in about the same time. It's set in the 1920s, and it's delightful. I loved it.
I really enjoyed the time and setting of this novel
Yes.
because I didn't know a whole lot about Mexico at this
And
time.
that's the same thing
which
that
is
I
why
enjoyed about it.
I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, there are neighbors. It was cool.
Yes.
And
I really liked that.
and like the feeling of particularly of this book, like amongst the orange orchards and the agriculture, this is very much Ventura County feeling too. So it felt very connected. Gods of Jade and Shadow, it leans more into mythology, so it's like easier to buy into.
Okay,
like there's less mystery to like how does this work.
It's a fantasy novel, whereas this is like, but why? Are you not
Yeah.
gonna tell me why?
Yeah, like
do I just have to accept? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You asked a lot of me, author. Now, a series I would recommend that moves in an inside-out timeline, but I thought was really good. It's by Rin Chupeco, and I'm looking for the title. Shadow Glass. Yeah. There's 3 books, and I am sorry to say I don't remember the order. The Bone Witch, I think, is the first one.
Bone Witch is good.
The Heart Forger, and the Shadow Glass. I think that's the order. Really good, but a weird inside out timeline, but it was good.
Yeah.
Like a little, there was no confusion, I think, in this timeline, but it was very, very good. And a good pace. And lots of social issues. That was all good. Anybody else?
So, yeah, I started this book early and then I got sidetracked by like 3 other books because apparently I read a book a week these days or listen to books. So I'm enjoying in a very personal, connected way The Ugly Cry by Danielle Henderson because her early life dysfunction is very similar to my own. Parts of it are funny, parts of it are just like she's like a decade younger, so some of the things that she contributes to the 80s, I just want to say, oh honey, that was the 70s too. As far as parenting. Sliver. Okay, I was been reading The Stepford Wives as part of a different book club because it touches on a whole lot of body dysmorphia, a whole lot of social issues, and it was meant to be satire. But I've only just started that because I got to actually pick up a book at a real library. The libraries are open. Yay! But while I was waiting, I started a book by the same author called Sliver.
Dude, that sounds fun.
Yeah, it's really good. Now it's not a particular. I mean, The Stepford Wives is only like half an inch thick. It's not a big book, and Sliver is just as thin. There's buildings called sliver buildings. We're in places like New York where 2 streets that are not quite parallel, but they kind of come together at a narrow angle. So these buildings...
I didn't know they had a name.
Yeah, they're called slivers. And a lot of developers and neighborhoods hate them. But it's interesting. This particular one is 20 stories high, and it's only like 1 apartment wide on either side. So every floor has only 2 apartments.
Oh, that's cool.
So there's kind of a mystery and a creepy psychological thriller factor to it. So he's the same author that also wrote Rosemary's Baby and a couple of others, and a lot of his books became movies and that ushered in a horror genre, which is not what he intended at all. So he's like these are satire, these are not horror, but somehow they got twisted.
The modern Stepford Wife is in that satirical tone, but it is still considered a horror movie.
Yeah. And then I started a series. I finished book 3 out of 14 because I have to pace myself.
3 out of 14. A 14-book series?
By A.J. Rivers, and they're basically murder. She's a FBI agent, and she's supposed to be she's just one of those things where she's at the wrong place at the wrong time. She's not really functioning as an FBI, but somehow murders happen around her. You know, kind of like in the Murder She Wrote kind of genre, but only better. And there's it's always the girl. The girl.
Did you say something's better than Murder She Wrote?
Better.
Okay, I could always predict who it was in the first 10 minutes, and then the rest of it was. And that was when I was. I mean, it's not like there's not a formula. It's the Scooby.
It's so formulaic.
It's
so
the
comforting.
Scooby-Doo formula.
It's
always the
it's one of
first
my
person you meet. And I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you meddling kids.
Yeah. I love Angela Lansbury, and I love Murder
I love
She Wrote.
Angela Lansbury.
So,
And
I love
okay, I'm
Murder,
not
She Wrote.
saying I don't love Murder She
So
Wrote.
these books better
It
be
was
good.
these are
That's my point.
Yeah. Start with the first one, the girl in cabin 13.
Oh, okay. That
And
is
then
supposed
there's
to be
the
a
girl
very
that
good book,
vanished. And then the girl
I didn't know
of
it
the
was a
manor
series.
is the
Yeah.
third one. But yeah, the girl in cabin 13. There's like a whole, I mean, psycho killer, boyfriend, unknown, ooh,
I didn't know that was like a whole.
so creepy.
That's a lot of books. She's
That's a lot of
prolific.
books.
I didn't know it was a whole ecosphere.
That's just the one in that series.
All right.
She's got other books outside of the series,
Wow.
but yeah. So
I'll have to give it a try.
Okay.
Emma Griffin FBI mystery series. Emma Griffin being the love interest also. So if you like a little romance, it's got a little some of that something. Anyway, that's all.
Okay, well, our next book is my pick, and we're doing a special asterisk to our normal how we pick a book, because this is a book I believe all three of us have already read.
I have not read it.
Oh, Anne
I
hasn't
did.
read
I
it.
didn't think Anne
No.
did. So
Okay.
I was,
No,
So 2 of us have read it.
I ordered it. It's coming tomorrow.
Great. So you could get it either digital or a print version of it.
It's already here.
It's called Across the Formidable Sea by Claire Laminen.
It says book 1, but I'm waiting for book 2 because it's
69.
so
Yeah.
good.
I looked at her
That's all I'm saying.
Goodreads,
Uh-huh.
and it said that the sequel is due out in 2018.
I know. Okay, so here's the thing. Claire Laminen is my cousin. This is her debut novel.
And it's awesome.
So it is I'll read you the back of the book because I have it here in front of me. Living on a sprawling English estate doesn't change the fact that 20-year-old Laura Elliott Stratford feels homeless. The year is 1920. It's been 6 years since Laura's beloved father passed away, since Laura's mother married a British earl and whisked Laura from her home in Virginia to the green expanses of Stratford. Lonely, rebellious, and bitterly resentful, Laura is especially vulnerable to the influence of 2 new people in her world. Graham, her stepfather's handsome new accountant, and Sarah, the youngest daughter of one of Birmingham's toughest families. 2 sides of Laura are awakened, and they cannot peacefully coexist inside her. Laura is faced with the decision of choosing who she will be, and neither choice is without consequence. Across the Formidable Sea follows one woman's search for home and happiness against the vibrant backdrop of the 1920s England, a world whose priorities and values are shifting as quickly as Laura's are. No matter the time or place, we are masters of our own fate, for better or for worse. So
Who's the publisher of this? I thought she self-published, didn't she?
It is self-published. You can buy a print copy on Amazon, and she gets the proceeds, or a digital copy, the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, she's my first cousin. She lives in the area, so she's a local author.
Who did the artwork on the cover? Because it's really neat.
The the artwork on the cover is the same person who designed our logo, Carly.
Oh, she's fantastic.
Yes.
I had no idea it was the same.
Yeah, it's the same girl. So we have,
Awesome,
or Karen and I
Carly.
have both picked it, or have read it, but it has been a while since I have read it, and I was thinking of rereading it.
Because I read it when it was brand new, so
Yep.
it's been a minute. So
Well-
I'm happy. I'm so happy to get to watch it again, read it again.
I spoke with the author just today, and she's agreed to come on the podcast and let us ask her questions. So we're gonna have an interview with the author.
awesome.
So if you, listener, are going to read this book or are reading it, please email me or text me or tell me in person whenever you see me any questions you might have for Claire, because when she comes and we record our little segment with her, I would love to be able to ask any questions that you have specifically for her, because we'll
Ask
come up
the
with some.
author. That's
yeah.
exciting.
So you can hound her yourself about the the sequel.
10. But
I
please
will.
don't everybody ask that question. Just assume we're going to ask that
Yeah,
question.
Yes.
we're gonna ask.
And
I
she-
will
will-
ask.
I will say she knows.
Yeah, right.
She knows.
Right? We'll
She is-
pretend that it was a
She's a
question
little
from
busy
our
right
audience.
now,
Yes.
though.
She is going to have a baby in 5 weeks, so she's a
This
little.
is a very good time to
Just-
take that nesting.
Yeah.
Because it's
instinct.
amazing
Right.
how you're not going to get much sleep anyway,
Yeah,
so
like,
you can get a lot accomplished.
You get a lot done. Yeah, my
Yeah.
house was never so clean and never will be clean as clean
As
again. If only I had written a book in that time.
Yes. So
That's when I learned to do knitting. Was when I had a newborn. So
Yeah. So that's Across the Formidable Sea by Claire Laminen.
That's when Toni Morrison really caught her, like hit her voice.
Oh, you're right.
actually.
You're right.
There's
I
a
mean,
lot.
Claire.
You know what?
We can
Okay.
tell her when she comes. We'll tell her.
There's an author that has written like almost 90 books, and she's got like 10 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And she it's something about the constant energy from all those children kept her
There you go.
prolific.
There you go. Okay. Well, read the book. Send us any questions that you have. And next time when we come back, we'll talk about the book and we'll talk about it with Claire. So that will be fun.
Woohoo! How exciting.
Yeah. And I know a couple of our regulars have already read the book because I mentioned that my cousin was an author and they were like, I'm going to read that book. So that'll be fun. Anyway, I think that's it for today. So we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you in 2 weeks for our regularly scheduled podcast episode. Okie dokie. Well, we'll see you next time.
Alrighty. Bye.